It's close to Halloween, and you go with friends to the local showing of a film. This happens every year. You watch as the scenes unfold, characters making choices and dying as a result from some cheesy killer in a mask. The police are basically a laughingstock. Nothing but a punchline as they try to capture the masked assailant, and failing. He gets away at the end, and the narrator tells you that they may still be among you now. And you know that's true, because you live in Texarkana, and that movie was based on a true story.
Welcome to Tales from the Graves, where shadows lurk and whispers echo.
Join us as we delve into the unknown, exploring tales of mystery, horror, and the supernatural.
Be prepared to journey into the darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jess.
Together, we're the Graves Sisters, and we'll be your guides as we unearth the strange and unusual.
So find your flashlight, grab your shovel, and let's dig in.
The following podcast is rated for mature audiences.
It may contain graphic scenes of violence and explicit language that some may find disturbing.
Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Gravediggers. Welcome to the very first episode of Tales from the Graves.
Number one, this is very exciting. You and I have talked about doing a podcast for a very long time, haven't we?
We have. It's, I don't know, I guess we've just always talked about this stuff and recommend.
Actually doing
I know. So, today, I'm gonna be the first one. I'm gonna be the first one doing the
you
episode.
You get to pop our podcast cherry.
That's really gross.
Yeah,
but okay.
Let's do it though. What do you have for us today, Jen?
All right. So, have you ever watched a horror movie and it tells you that it's based on a true story?
Those are the best ones to watch, actually, especially if they're rated R.
Yeah. So I think one of the most famous is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is based off the horrendous acts of Ed Gein.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He made like a belt out of like lady nipple parts. And, yeah.
Yeah. Well, today I'm not going to be going into that one. I'm going to be going into detail about a film that was released in 1976.
Ooh.
The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
That's a good one. Mm-hmm. That is okay. All right.
Yeah. So, listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, I absolutely recommend it for any horror buff, as it's one of the first films in what we know today as the slasher genre. Did you know that?
No, I did not. I was kind of wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, a little history. The Town That Dreaded Sundown came out 2 years before a much wider known slasher flick. Do you know what that flick was?
Was it Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
No.
Oh. Okay, 2 years. So what year did it come out?
1976.
76. Oh my gosh. I don't know.
Halloween.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our boy Michael Myers came out in 1978. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. The golden era of like budding 80s slasher films. Okay.
Oh, yes.
So this film follows the incidents pretty closely as to what happened in real life back in Texarkana in 1946. They did take some artistic liberties with certain aspects depicted in the movie, and I'll make sure to point those out because some of them are, for lack of a better term, kind of outlandish.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so The actual name of the murders that took place, they dubbed them the Texarkana Moonlight Murders.
Okay.
They took place between February 22nd and May 3rd of 1946 in Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas.
This was in the 40s?
Yeah, 1946.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, way, way back in the day, okay? The movie mostly takes place on the Arkansas side of Texarkana, when in reality, most of the crimes took place on the Texas side of Texarkana. And for our listeners who aren't very familiar with Texarkana, it is a town that is right on the border between Arkansas and Texas, hence the name Texarkana. And so you just go with it, I guess. The movie starts out with idyllic scenes of 1946 Texarkana. A narrator telling the audience about how the war had just ended and most of the boys had made it back home to start their lives again.
Boomers.
Yeah. Yeah. Then he comes on and tells us something in the usual ominous tone. The incredible story you're about to see is true. Where it happened and how it happened. Only the names have been changed.
Dun, dun, dun. That's how you know it's going to be good.
Yeah. So, the names that I'm going to be using are going to actually be the victims' names, because we are going to be delving into the actual victims and the murders that took place.
Yeah.
So, we follow a couple out to Lover's Lane after they just finished a movie. Jimmy Hollis, age 25, and his girlfriend, Mary Jean Lowry, age 19, parked on a secluded road, aka a Lover's Lane.
Lover's Lane.
Now, this particular Lover's Lane was only 300 feet or 91 meters from the last row of city homes. For comparison, that's the, like a standard regulation football field is 360 feet long. Yeah, so it's really not that far, right?
I mean, you can literally just walk to Lover's Lane instead of having to drive there and make out in your car.
Well, I'm pretty sure they wanted to do more than just make out.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, well,
I mean,
more power to you.
Yeah. So, but like it's close enough where like screaming can be heard and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
You would think that. I mean, I know there's like dense woods and things of that nature, and Lord knows what people are doing in their homes, listening to their radios because it's the 40s.
Yeah.
So, anyway, they made it to Lover's Lane around 11:45 p.m. Roughly 10 minutes later, a man with a white cloth mask resembling a pillowcase with eyes cut out and mouth, he appears at Jimmy's door, so the driver's side door, and shines a flashlight in his face. What you doing?
I would be thinking it was like the KKK with like the white hood and the eyes cut out.
Well, I mean, it was not pointy. I know it's the South, but it was not pointy.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So Jimmy states that he told this guy, "You've got the wrong person." To which the masked man replied, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." So he's got a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other.
Okay.
Yeah. The couple was ordered out of the vehicle, and the masked assailant ordered Jimmy to take off his goddamned breeches. For our younger listeners...
Breeches or pants?
Yes. Breeches is pants, okay?
That's what our grandmother used to call them, was breeches.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy complied, but he was rewarded with being struck in the head twice with a firearm. So, like, he was pistol whipped.
Okay.
Mary Jean later told investigators that the noise was so loud, she had initially thought Jimmy had been shot, but in fact, what she had heard was his skull fracturing. I I'm not sure if you know how much force is required to fracture a human skull.
A lot.
1,100 pounds, also known as 500 kilograms of force. I mean, the skull is one of the hardest bones in the body, considering, it's the thing that protects what pilots are meat suit.
Yeah.
So.
Good Lord. And he was hit twice?
Twice.
Oh, all right. Well,
yeah.
That guy must have been super friggin' strong.
So, Mary Jean assumed the masked assailant was robbing them. So, she showed him Jimmy's wallet because, back in the 40s, women did not pay for their dates.
Yeah.
Showed that he had no money, and after she did this, the masked assailant struck her with a blunt object. The pistol.
Most likely the pistol, yeah.
He ordered her to stand, and when she did, he told her to run. Initially, she took off toward the ditch, and he stopped her and told her to run up the street instead. And so she did. Mary Jean came across a car parked off the road, but it was sadly empty, and that's when the masked assailant caught up to her. Thinking back on it, more than likely, that car was the masked assailant's car.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. He asked her why she was running, and she, of course, told him, "You told me to."
You said to do it.
He then called her a liar and pushed her down. And here's where it gets a little gritty, okay? He sexually assaulted her with the barrel of his gun.
Excuse me?
Yeah. Yeah, he sexually assaulted her with the barrel of his gun. This is a major difference between the 1976 film and what happened, because in the film, they clearly stated that no one had been sexually assaulted. Instead, in the movie, they stated that the masked assailant bit them harshly on the breasts and other parts of their bodies. Which, I don't know.
He's got a freaking pillowcase on his head.
Well, I mean,
he had a mouth hole.
Yeah, he had a mouth hole. He had a mouth hole.
Okay.
But, in the movie, he did not have a mouth hole. So.
Okay.
I'm telling you, so this is a great movie, but it's also real goofy, okay? In 1976, I think that they were trying to tell the story, also make it more dramatic, as well as, hey, we want this to be able to play in theaters.
Oh, yeah. So they had to, quote unquote, redact that part, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, well, after she was assaulted, Mary Jean was able to flee on foot. Okay? She fled on foot, running half a mile to the nearest house where she was able to wake the inhabitants, and they phoned the police. Meanwhile, Jimmy Hollis, her boyfriend, whom she thought was dead, because what she heard
she
sounded like
a gun. Yeah.
He regained consciousness and was able to flag down a passing motorist, and they also called the police.
Ugh. Okay.
Yeah, this man crawled his way to the road to flag down a passing motorist.
Oof.
Yeah. Within 30 minutes, Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley and 3 other officers arrived at the scene. But sadly, the masked assailant had already fled.
Dun-dun-dun-dun.
Mary Jean was hospitalized overnight for a minor head wound, and Jimmy Hollis was hospitalized for several days to recover from multiple skull fractures.
Yeah.
So, Mary Jean and Jimmy Hollis have been through some really heavy trauma. But this was 1946, and if there's anything that I've learned from listening to podcasts that cover cold cases like this, the police fucking sucked ass.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God.
So after reviewing the public records from the FBI database, there was so much negligence and mishandling of everything. They lost a bullet and casing that the Texarkana police had sent them for analysis. There was also a lot of stuff having about a partial palm print when the local police were sending them fingerprints. Like, they didn't have palm prints.
Okay, let's see if we can get a fingerprint from a palm print. They're two completely different things.
Oh, yeah. So, now, law enforcement, they're obviously questioning Jimmy and Mary Jean, you know. But they aren't questioning Jimmy as much because he's in the hospital. Multiple skull fractures, right?
And he was hit in the head. They thought maybe he might have some kind of brain damage, possibly. You never know.
I don't think they cared about that.
Yeah, they probably didn't.
Well, law enforcement repeatedly challenged Mary Jean Lowry's account of the attack. They believed that she and Jimmy knew the identity of the attacker and were covering for him.
Why would they cover for somebody that did those disgusting things to her and bashed his head in? Why?
Well, their reasoning for thinking this, Mary Jean's and Jimmy Hollis's description of their attacker were supposedly, quote unquote, vastly different.
Come on.
You want to know what their descriptions were?
Well, yeah. How are they different?
So, one of them described their assailant as a light-skinned black man, about 6 feet tall, between the ages of about 30, maybe a little bit older. The other described their assailant as a tan-skinned white man, about 6 foot, closer to the ages of like 25 to 30.
How is that vastly different? Just using different verbiage?
Yeah, and I mean, you also have to think that during this time, she was being assaulted. Jimmy had his head bashed in. The guy was wearing a pillowcase over his head.
And it was dark. I mean, you could pretty much just see, like, hands, right?
Yeah, unless he wore gloves.
Unless he wore gloves.
And then you're just really going by, like, what you can see through the eye holes and the mouth hole.
And maybe a voice, but, I mean, how would you assume the skin tone just from a voice?
Okay. Yep. So, we've established that was messed up. Okay?
Yeah.
So, Texarkana at that time in the 1940s, it wasn't uncommon for the police to get called for domestic disturbances, for knife fights, and for shootings. So they kind of chalked up what happened to Mary Jean Lowry and Jimmy Hollis as like just a random act of violence.
Well, okay.
Okay, they had nothing else to go on, so I will give them that. About a month later, on March 24th, Richard L. Griffin, age 29, and his girlfriend of 6 weeks, Polly Ann Moore, age 17. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. That's a little creepy.
Wait, he was 29 and she was 17.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, you know, maybe Richard served and like he was back and he's like, oh, all the ladies around my age are like taken and married, and like I have to get a high schooler.
Okay, sure. A different time.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, They were found dead in Richard's car on the morning of Sunday, March 24th by a passing motorist. So, so this is the first time our masked assailant has killed, and it's a double murder. So that's a major escalation from the attack on Jimmy and Mary Jane.
Yeah.
The motorist noticed a parked car on another lover's lane in Bowie County. Unlike a lot of the movies where you see, oh, it's a lover's lane and like there's a bunch of people there. That's not really how lover's lanes worked.
Yeah, you want to try to keep it as private as possible so nobody can go tell your pastor or your mom's bridge buddies.
Yeah, so a lot of times a lover's lane was just considered a deserted stretch of road.
Yeah.
So Griffin was found between the front seats on his knees with his head resting on his crossed hands and his pockets turned inside out.
Okay.
Polly Ann was found sprawled face down in the back seat. That's not all, though. There was evidence that suggests that she was placed there after being killed. And this is where I'm kind of getting conflicting information when I looked up this case. So they thought that it was possible she had been killed on a blanket outside of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get into like why. But Richard was shot twice while in the car. They supposedly confirmed that he had been shot twice while in the car. Both Richard and Polly Ann had been shot once in the back of the head, and both were fully clothed. The evidence that Polly Ann had been killed outside of the car and then placed back in the car was a blood-soaked patch of earth found close to the car, congealed blood. It was found covering the running board, and it had flowed through the bottom of the car door. However, further correspondence with the FBI stated that there wasn't any other evidence developed as it had rained all evening.
So some of it could have possibly washed away.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So they found a .32 caliber bullet casing wrapped in a blanket. That's where the theory about Polly Ann being killed on the blanket outside the vehicle comes from. It doesn't look like either Richard Griffin or Polly Ann Moore was examined by a pathologist. There was a local rumor, however, that said Polly Ann had also been sexually assaulted, but the modern reports refute this claim. I will say that in my research, I have yet to find where those new reports came from.
So, new reports. So that makes it seem like they reopened the case a couple times, or?
Well, so reviewing the FBI documents, there were so many communications because I'll go into this, but like the FBI never officially got involved. They just acted as a liaison for fingerprint analysis because back in 1946, you didn't have your local state crime labs or anything like that. They were all FBI offices, and you would send them this stuff, and they would come back to you and let you know, oh, it's inconclusive, or oh, it's a match.
Yeah, because they don't have like CODIS and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
a palm print.
Well, by March 30th, police had offered a $500 reward to gain any new information, but instead only got 100 or so false leads. 3 weeks later, at around 1:30 a.m. on April 14th, James Paul Martin, who went by Paul, age 17, picked up Betty Jo Booker age 15, from a musical performance at the VFW club. Betty played the saxophone in the school band and was there at the VFW club playing for a dance. The next time either was seen was at about 6:30 a.m. when Paul's body was found.
So just Paul's?
I'm gonna get to it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. At 6:30, that's when Paul's body was located. So blood was found on the other side of the road where they found Paul. He had been shot 4 times, through the nose, through the ribs from behind, and in the right hand, and through the back of the neck. So that kind of led them to believe like he was booking it, like he was trying to escape. They started a search party but didn't find Betty's body until about 11:30 a.m.
So she must have been far away from him.
Yep, Betty's body was behind a tree and she was lying on her back, fully clothed. She was posed with the right hand in the pocket of the buttoned overcoat she had worn that evening. Betty had been shot twice through the chest and once in the face.
Yikes. So was like the hand in the pocket like a clue?
No, honestly, it was just him posing her.
Oh. Man, I was hoping there would probably be like a note in the pocket, like giving them a hint about who he was or something. Like a Zodiac note. But okay.
Nope. I was actually telling my therapist about this story, and she said that it sounds like the killer hated women. And that's why it seems so personal. Like with the shooting in the face.
Yeah, and he didn't pose the men at all, just the women, right? So far? Oh.
So far, yeah. Well, I mean, he did pose Richard Griffin's body.
Oh,
yeah,
because
he was
hands on the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he did pose that one.
But that was his first one, wasn't it? No, that was the second.
No, Richard and Polly were his first murder.
His first. Okay, first murder. Okay.
Yeah. So, unlike the previous murder of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, Paul and Betty's bodies were not in the car. So, that's a little deviation. Was this a similar case to what happened with Mary Jean Lowry and Jimmy Hollis, where they were instructed to get out of the car and run? So, like, was he looking for the ultimate sport kind of thing that you see in other movies? While the investigators weren't sure which victim was shot first, because that kind of stuff did not happen until later. Like, that wasn't... You just weren't able to figure that out until much later. Sheriff Presley and Texas Ranger Manuel T. Gonzalez said that the victims' bodies showed signs that they put up a terrific struggle.
Yeah, they were probably fighting, of course.
So, per the records of communication with the FBI, the bullets matched those used in the first murder of Richard and Polly Ann. Other evidence that was found at the murder scene was a black hat cord, which I read so much about this stupid black hat cord, okay? They were grasping at literally anything at this point. But you know what?
What?
That stupid black hat cord was never able to be linked to anything. Yeah. Other than that, it didn't belong to either victim or the owner of the car, which was Paul's father. And Betty's saxophone was missing.
Well, he could sell it for something, possibly.
Yeah. They did do a swab of Betty's vaginal area, and it was positive for semen.
So he didn't use a gun. Oh, well, it could have been boyfriends, right?
Well, they then did a saline solution wash of Paul's penis for any traces that he and Betty had been together prior to the murder, and it was negative. They also didn't find any foreign hairs, pubic or otherwise, on the body. The investigating officers did hold back evidence from the papers regarding the double murder, such as the discovery of bullets and bullet casings recovered and the fact that Betty had been raped.
Because they wanted to show that, like, if the killer came forth or if anyone actually had a lead and says something about the case, that, oh, this person might have actually been involved in some way because they have info that we never shared.
Exactly. I also kind of think that it was to not cause more mass hysteria than what was going on.
Yeah.
But back in 1946, DNA evidence was not a thing.
No.
Mm-mm. So you remember that $500 reward?
Yes.
Well, after this double murder, it was raised to $1,700. That's a lot of money in 1946.
That is a lot.
Mm-hmm. So at this time, we are going to revisit Polly Ann's Moore's case regarding sexual assault. Okay? As I said previously, there was a rumor that she may have been assaulted and that modern reports refute this claim. But I want to point something out that was pointed out in the FBI documents. So this is in these documents that I painstakingly pored over for the last week. They were unable to determine if Polly Ann had been sexually assaulted, as the undertaker had embalmed the body before the officers could complete the investigation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I would be flipping my lid because you have to. Okay.
So, I said earlier that I was unable to locate the new reports and read them for myself. But the way it sounds to me is that it's still a possibility that she was sexually assaulted. They just couldn't do accurate testing due to Polly Ann being embalmed already.
Yeah.
So with the knowledge that we have today, it's 2024, all the shows we watch on true crime, it does boggle my mind that a rape kit wasn't done on all of the victims. Not just the females. Mm-hmm. But again, this was 1946 in the South of all places. And at the time, only the FBI had the capability to do fingerprint analysis, and DNA wasn't really a thing until about 40 years later. So, in the 1980s is when DNA really started to be a thing where you could take evidence and you could try and match it up. So, honestly, they swabbed to see if an assault had taken place, not to gather DNA evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, per official documents from the FBI, as of April 15th, 1946, a day after Paul and Betty's bodies were found, it details the Bureau's participation in the investigation. So I said that they, were acting as liaisons. So it states, Special Agent J.O. Jenkins of the Dallas office telephonically advised that the Bureau is not actively engaging in the investigation of these murders, that no federal violation is apparent. The FBI was still new at this time in 1946, but now we have 2 double homicides that are following a pretty similar MO.
Yeah.
So we're up to 1 assault with sexual assault, with the barrel of the gun, but still. 2 double murders, one at which it confirmed a sexual assault happened, but no federal violation is apparent. Okay?
Oh my gosh.
In the movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Betty Jo's murder was one of the more outlandish ones that I've ever seen in a film. And I have seen a lot of horror movies, okay? Instead of a saxophone, our actress who is portraying Betty Jo plays the trombone. And subsequently is murdered using said trombone. The Phantom Killer, as dubbed by the newspapers, tapes a knife to the end of the trombone slide.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Oh, yeah. And he blows into the instrument while pushing the slide down and stabbing his victim over and over again.
What was the point?
Well, that is where they took some of their artistic liberties. I guess they thought that a young, innocent woman being murdered by the instrument that she played was more horrific than what actually happened to her.
And they said rock and roll was the devil.
Yeah. So the police in the film, after Paul and Betty's murder, decide to dress up as couples and go out to lovers' lanes to try and catch the Phantom Killer. And again, the police are made the comedic relief of the movie with just how absurd it is.
Well, they were basically the comedic relief in this case because they couldn't figure anything out.
Now, Gonzalez, in real life, he did try baiting the Phantom Killer by recruiting actual teenagers to sit as decoys in parked cars while officers waited nearby. And then other officers also volunteered as decoys with real partners or mannequins. But I doubt it was treated as lightly as the almost slapstick comedy that was portrayed in the film. On May 3rd, sometime before 9 p.m., Virgil Starks, 37, and his wife, Katie, 36, were having a relaxing evening at home on their farm northeast of Texarkana by about 10 miles on the Arkansas side of the town. We have some conflicting statements about what Virgil was doing, but it was either listening to the radio or reading the newspaper, maybe even both.
You never know. People can multitask.
Yeah. Katie was in another room of the home. Virgil was shot twice through the window in the back of the head. Katie heard the glass and the subsequent sound of her husband's body hitting the floor and came running to see Virgil stand up and then slump back down in his chair, dead. I'm honestly not sure how someone can take 2 bullets to the head, stand up, and then slump into a chair and die. But those are the accounts that I found online. Okay? That's what's in the documents. So I'm just saying, okay?
All right.
No. So after she realized her husband was dead, Katie ran to the crank telephone to call the police. For our younger listeners, back in the day, you had to crank your telephone and get an operator. We may include some photos of what a crank telephone looks like on our Instagram, Tales from the Graves podcast. She rang twice before being shot twice herself in the face.
In the face?
From the same window. So one bullet passed completely through her nose. So like side profile, boop, right through her nose, okay? The other bullet broke her jaw and was lodged under her tongue. Katie fell, but soon regained her footing and tried to get the pistol from another room. but she was blinded by her own blood. She states that she heard the killer at the back of the house and then fled out the front door, barefoot. It is believed that the killer entered the house trying to find Katie Starks and somehow didn't disturb anything within the home. He did, however, walk through a lot of Katie's blood that was on the floor, and some linoleum tiles were pulled and sent for analysis. Nothing ever really came back on those.
So they couldn't figure out what size shoe, what type of shoe, none of that stuff.
Nothing ever came of it. From what I read, nothing ever came of it.
Oh,
right? Mrs. Starks ran across the street to the home of her sister and brother-in-law, but no one was home. So she ran to the neighbor's house, A.V. Prater. She gasped that Virgil's dead and then collapsed. Her neighbor, Prater, then shot a rifle into the air to summon another neighbor, Elmer Taylor, who he sent to get his car, and then, along with the other members of the Prater family, they took Katie to the hospital. Outside the Starks' home, a 2-celled flashlight was found where the killer had been standing, as well as 3 .22 caliber cartridge cases. They were able to pull one bullet from Virgil, but the other was not found. Of the bullets that shot Mrs. Starks, they were able to recover the bullet that passed through her nose, and at the time these reports to the FBI were done, the bullet that was lodged under her tongue had not been removed yet.
Ooh.
Yeah, so this is like the very next day she's in the hospital, that whole thing. After the murder of Virgil Starks, the reward had reached $7,025 and then passed $10,000 within the following 10 days for any information that could lead to the arrest of whoever's perpetrating these crimes.
So what would make them think that it was, other than the gun, that it was the same person? Because recently the last 3 attacks were on lovers lanes, and then this one is on a random farm. It sounds...
So, based off just the proximity of it, I believe, and the fact that Mrs. Starks never actually saw the assailant, at the time, they decided to consider these murders all together as well as separately. So, are they all linked? I don't know. But let's take a look at it. Because that's obviously what's going on in the police brains, okay?
Okay.
So they were able to pull fingerprints and footprints, and those were sent to the FBI, along with the bullets and cartridge cases, which they did confirm that it was a .22 Colt Woodman automatic or similar type gun that was likely the weapon. This is where the Phantom Killer's reign of terror stops. In the movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, we see a thrilling chase of our 2 main investigators as they were right on the heels of our killer. But even though they were shot, the killer managed to get away from them and supposedly either left town on a train, left through a swamp, whatever, This didn't happen in real-life Texarkana. The murders just stopped. No one was ever arrested for these crimes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've laid out the assault and the murders attributed to the Phantom Killer of Texarkana, and I've touched on the sloppy work that was done on the whole case at points. Now I'm going to be going over what happened in Texarkana during the Phantom's terror and the absolute crackerjack job the police and Texas Rangers did. After Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were murdered, Mary Jean Lowry came back to Texarkana in hopes of helping link the case with her own assault. She survived, and that's when Texas Rangers questioned her story and insisted that she knew who her attacker was. They didn't connect the first assault to the murders until May 11th of that year because, not even just talking to Mary Jean themselves, but it was because of an interview that she did with the Texarkana Gazette. Yeah. They were more concerned, it seems, with picking apart her story and trying to make it fit what they wanted it to, as opposed to actually listening to her and linking the cases together. Sheriff Presley and Chief of Police Jack Runnels called on the public to basically snitch on anyone who had an unexplained absence for when the murders occurred. They questioned over 200 people in regards to this case, and just about the same amount of false leads were checked. They did bring in 3 people with bloody clothing, but they were cleared of suspicion because they supposedly had good reasons why they were covered in blood. Yeah.
Did they say what their good reasons
No.
were? No.
No, they did not. Just that the stories checked out and they were cleared. After Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were murdered, just about anyone who had ever met the couple were questioned by Bowie County investigators who supposedly worked in 24-hour shifts. Some suspects were brought in from as far away as 100 miles. That's 160 kilometers for the rest of the world. After Virgil Starks was murdered, officers from the entire area were called upon to help the investigation. Blockades were effected on Highway 67 East. People who were driving around that time of the murder were detained and brought in for questioning. So they were detained by police and brought in for questioning. By May 5th, a total of 47 officers were working to help solve the case. Want to know what a majority of the officers thought the motive behind the Stark killing was?
Please don't tell me it was racism.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, maybe they wanted to, wait, behind the Stark murder?
Yeah, the Stark murder.
Oh.
Virgil Starks.
My bad. I don't know.
Sex mania.
What?
Why sex mania?
For a farmer?
Hold on.
Okay.
Well, that's because no money was taken from the home, even though the killer had been in the home. Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought about that with the Lover's Lane, because I was thinking, okay, people going off, having premarital relations in the middle of the night, didn't have good morals, but on a how was that sex mania? How could that have been sex mania?
I don't know. But that's what a majority of the officers thought was sex mania.
Well, the majority of those people are idiots because I guess he was just on a...
So back in 1946, there was some hesitation to include the murder of Virgil Starks with the Phantom killings just because the bullets were different and it is believed to be an automatic rifle. By November of 1948, they no longer considered the Starks case to be connected with the other 2 double murders.
So that's where the difference in the MO kind of...
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so they finally said, hey, after 2 years, we've decided that's a different dude.
I mean, I would say so.
Like I said earlier, the city of Texarkana was no stranger to the occasional bar brawl, or maybe even stabbing here or there. But murder was definitely not on their bingo card for 1946, okay?
I'd say so.
Betty Jo Booker School let out early so students could attend the funeral of the former Little Miss Texarkana. And other schools let out early so hundreds of young people could attend the funerals of the other victims. They instituted curfews for businesses to try and keep people off the streets. After the murder of Virgil Starks, it was as if the town of Texarkana went bonkers. The media wasn't helping things by publishing articles that stated that the Phantom Killer might strike again at any moment, at any place, and at anyone. Back in the 1940s, it was completely normal for doors to be left unlocked, but after the killings started and all the doors started to be locked and residents were arming themselves with guns, some even went as far as to cover their windows with plywood. Stores sold out of locks, guns, ammunition, window shades, and Venetian blinds. Other home protection devices also saw a huge uptake in purchases. So, we're talking, like, I guess, melee weapons. People were taking out ads in the newspaper looking for guard dogs.
I mean, I would.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a big old Rottweiler or pit bull, something intimidating looking.
So, Texas Ranger Manuel T. Gonzalez didn't help quell the fear that festered in Texarkana either. On May 7th, he told citizens to oil up their guns and see if they are loaded, and to not hesitate if they feel it necessary to use them. This just added fuel to the fire, as already residents were trigger happy to the point that even police had to use their sirens and announce themselves when they called upon homeowners for questioning, as they feared they would be shot. The police.
Okay.
Fear eventually subsided when, after 3 weeks, there was no further murders. And while tensions were still high during the summer months, it seemed that the Phantom Killer and what he did were almost forgotten as life carried on. The investigation continued, however, and throughout almost 400 suspects were arrested, none convicted. 9 different people confessed to being the Phantom, but their statements didn't agree with the facts of the case. I'm about to go into 2 of them, though. All right?
Okay.
On May 23rd, Ralph Barney Bauman left a note with Los Angeles newspaper which stated, quote, "On a certain day in March, I was in Texarkana Theater watching a Path News Pick war when a party of persons acted wise and said, overacting. It kind of got to me. I followed them home. I killed them within a period of 3 days. I'm now in LA and I am not signing due to written identification," unquote. Then he appeared at the newspaper and offered to sell some murder info. Oh, it gets worse, bro.
Okay. I don't know how it could get worse.
On May 24th, Los Angeles police advised they took him into custody. Ralph stated he was in Texarkana from March 25th until May 3rd, at which time he left by hitchhiking, and while riding in that car on his way west, he heard his description broadcast as being wanted for the murders. After a lot of questioning, Ralph claims that he didn't remember what he did from the date of arrival in Texarkana to when he left. His last memory was of being in a Texarkana theater watching a Path News showing the actions of the Second World War in the South Pacific, and he overheard people in front of him saying it was overacted. Well, apparently Ralph took offense to this and he accosted them and told them it was. After he said that, a fight apparently broke out and he went outside the theater until these people came out and he followed them to their home, but stated he does not recall returning there and committing any act of violence. During questioning, he claimed to have been confined to a psychopathic, not psychiatric, hospital in 1938, having been placed there by his parents. Then goes on to tell officers that he stayed in the woods on the outskirts of Texarkana and that he didn't recall ever staying in a room or where he ate while he was there. Then recalls coming to on the 3rd and wondering what he had done for the whole month. There were apparently many discrepancies in his story, such as stating he meant he rode a trolley motor bus instead of a streetcar. And then there was the press release about him eating watermelon in Hobart, Arkansas, but denies ever having made a statement to anyone, including newspaper reporters. Also denies having made a statement that he took 2 victims 10 miles from Texarkana in dessert. Then... I know, it's a whole roller coaster with this guy.
Good Lord.
Then was unable to recall ever having made the later 2 statements concerning watermelon and desert to anyone during his recent interviews with the police. Ralph claimed to have blackouts. He stated he remembered having a fight and then coming to on May 3rd.
That is... So he sits there, claims that he did it, or he murdered some people, and so he could have possibly been the pillowcase guy, but no, I'm not the pillowcase guy, because I don't remember anything that happened to me.
Oh, yeah. No,
He's either doing it for attention, for money, or he's some kind of schizophrenic, maybe. I don't know.
I'm leaning towards schizophrenic. Like...
You should have stayed in that hospital.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So there was one confession that pointed out the most likely suspect, and I'm going to spend a little time on it. Yule Swinney. Like Yule Swinney? Age 29, a car thief, and a counterfeiter. Arkansas State Police Detective Max Tackett had begun investigating stolen car cases after he realized that on the night Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were murdered, a car had been stolen in the area and a previously stolen car had been abandoned. Officer Tackett was able to locate the stolen car and then arrested Yule Swinney's wife, Peggy Swinney. They then searched the Swinney residence for anything that could possibly be evidence and found a shirt having a laundry mark bearing the name of Starks. So they went to Mrs. Swinney and asked her about it. Know what she did?
What?
On July 25th, she told Sheriff Davis of Texarkana, Arkansas, that she had been with Yule Swinney when he killed James Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker on April 14th. A signed statement was then taken with the county attorney and sheriff present. Mrs. Swinney stated that they had had a couple of beers in Texarkana and had driven to Lover's Lane, parked after midnight on April 14th. They parked their car about 200 feet past Paul's car and walked back to his car. Yule Swinney took out a .32 automatic in one hand and a glove on the other. They took the boy and girl out of the car and made them get in their car, which was a stolen Plymouth sedan, and drove them about a quarter of a mile from Paul's car when Yule made Paul get out of the car and climb over the fence, then shot him twice. Mrs. Swinney held the girl in the car while this happened. Yule returned and they drove down the road and turned around, and when they came back past the spot where Paul had been shot, they noticed he was staggering down the road, whereupon Swinney stopped the car and went out to where Paul was standing and shot him again. They then proceeded down the road, driving first up one side road and another, and finally stopped. Mrs. Swinney stated that Yule made her get out of the car for almost 30 minutes while he raped Betty Jo Booker. Mrs. Swinney stated she was close enough to the car to hear the screams of the girl. They then drove down more side roads, and finally, Yule made Betty Jo get out of the car, and they walked into a wooded area, and Mrs. Swinney heard 2 gunshots. Yule drove his car around the area and finally stopped in a secluded area where he changed clothes because the ones he had been wearing were covered in blood. According to the FBI documents, the place Mrs. Swinney pointed out for where her husband changed clothes is the same place where Paul's address book was found.
Oh.
Now, it keeps going, man. She's a chatterbox. After changing clothes, they drove back down the road to Paul's car, and Yule Sweeney retrieved a black case from the back seat and put it in their own, at which point they returned to Texarkana and drove to a wooded area in the country near her parents' home and spent the night and the following day. The next night was spent at her parents' home, and the following day they headed to Dallas. At some point in the journey, Yule stopped the car on the side road and burned the bloody clothes. Mrs. Swinney states she has never seen the black case since. It was put in their back seat on the night of the murder. Yule apparently told his wife that the gun he used in the murder of Paul and Betty Jo was the same gun he used in the murder of Richard and Polly Ann, but he didn't tell her anything further about the first murder. Then Mrs. Swinney stated that she had had a date with a man named Virgil Starks at a Savoy hotel around January 1st of that year, and that there was another couple present. Since that time, the girl that was present had advised her husband of the date, and Yule, after an argument on May 3rd, told her he was going to take care of the Starks. Yule Sweeney then left and returned later and told her that he had taken care of the Starks and that he was wearing some old shoes that had Red River mud on them.
Oh.
They later went to Little Rock, and she dropped those shoes in the river on the way. The Arkansas State Police had Yule Sweeney in custody, but he had made no admissions to the signed confession that his wife gave. It's worth noting that the stolen Plymouth car that was being used by the couple had 2 Allstate tires, which matched tire tracks left at the scene of one of the murders. The Arkansas police were to take Miss Swinney on a little ride so she could show them where she tossed the shoes, and in Little Rock, where they had Yule Sweeney, they were trying to get a confession out of him. So they have a confession right now and a suspect with a few pieces of evidence. The case is looking good, right?
Yeah.
They verified many times with her that her statement was true, but as of July 29th, they were going to take Mrs. Swinney to Dallas to find where they stopped to burn the clothes, and at that time she stated that entire story given by her was untrue and that she had made previous admissions because she had been questioned so extensively by Arkansas police and now denies any knowledge of the murders.
How could she have details about stuff that were involved in the case that they never shared with the public and then just be like, I made it up?
Yeah.
No!
The Sheriff's Office of Texarkana, Texas, and the Texas Rangers are now convinced that her statement was untrue, but they still had Yule Sweeney in custody in Arkansas. So investigators worked for 6 months trying to validate Mrs. Swinney's confession and tie Swinney to the murders. They found that the night of Paul and Betty's murder, they were sleeping in their car under a bridge near San Antonio. Yule Sweeney was charged as a habitual offender of stealing cars, and pleaded no contest and tried to plead guilty despite the fact that a habitual offender charge required a jury trial. In Sheriff Presley's book, because of course he wrote a book about all this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. He stated that Yul Swinney was concerned about being sentenced to death for the murders. So the habitual offender charge was it was better for him, basically. Then, in November of 1948, H.B. Doody Tennyson, Doody, an 18-year-old university freshman, unalived himself and left behind cryptic instructions which directed investigators to a suicide note in which he confessed to the murders of Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, as well as Virgil Starks. He apparently played trombone in the same high school band as Betty, but they weren't friends. Investigators weren't able to find any other evidence linking Doody to the murders. In fact, a friend of his came forward with an alibi for the night of the Starks murder. He said, we were together playing cards that night. There are other countless suspects, like a saxophone peddler who was arrested in Corpus Christi, Texas, for trying to sell a saxophone to a music store. After questioning him, he was cleared, and eventually on October 24th, they finally found Betty's saxophone in some underbrush near the place her body had been found.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they didn't canvass the area very well. They're like, oh, there's a body. Let's just...
Oh my gosh.
I could go on and on about the different likely suspects, but ultimately, no one was arrested and charged for the crimes.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So, at the end of the town that dreaded sundown, our lead investigators, they track the Phantom Killer, and they are led through a foot chase that ends with the killer being shot in the leg and escaping with the help of a train that's passing through and then into the swamps. We then see a line of feet waiting to buy tickets for the movie premiere in 1976. The narrator is saying, if you ask people what they believe what happened to the Phantom Killer, most would say he is still living here and is still walking free. So that's how it ends.
I honestly think that they had a viable suspect in
Yul Swinney.
Yul. I mean,
he did go to jail as a habitual offender for,
other
carjacking.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, I guess they were trying to make it like someone had gone to jail for something. But ultimately, it is a cold case.
And it's still cold.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if the perpetrator who did everything was between the ages of 25 and 30, that person's going to be in their 90s by now.
Yeah, or dead.
Yeah, more than likely they're dead. So, sadly, this is probably going to just continue to be a cold case. Now, if they'd kept the semen...
They could have done, like, mitochondrial or
there's
children or anything, if any of that, yeah.
Yeah. It's a possibility, but, like, people have got to be willing to offer up their DNA for it.
I mean, they lost a freaking bullet.
Yep.
If they lost a bullet, you know they lost... Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
More stuff, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess, for now, we'll just have to lay this one to rest.
If you like what you heard, please feel free to follow, like, rate, and review Tales from the Graves podcast on your preferred listening platform.
We also would like to know what you think and what topic you suggest we unearth next. Email us at talesfromthegravespod@gmail.com or reach out to us at Tales from the Graves podcast on Instagram.
And if you have Discord, join us in the graveyard. The link is in our bio on our Instagram as well as this listening platform. Thanks again, Grave Diggers. Keep on digging.